Welcome to Tech Tuesday 31. Today we're going to talk about IP portfolios and JTBD, which is short for job to be done. And of course, not legal advice. And before we start, let's take a moment of silence. We have a war, we have hostages. Patent attorneys write patents. People always talk about this patent, that patent, but we know that even if it's the best patent in the world, you usually need more than one. And in fact, a typical company has an IP portfolio, which usually has multiple patents and also multiple other items that are not patents, but are IP. Now, I want to be clear, IP items, let's call them that, can work alone, but usually IP items work together either with other parts of your portfolio or they work together with things that are not IP in order to achieve business goals. I just want to make a comment that often when people talk about an IP portfolio, they, especially doing due diligence, they ask you about what are the key patents? Okay, what are the most important patents? And maybe, I don't know if you're familiar with the star system, where movie studios had stars and you built a movie around the star. And as we'll see today, and as you probably know, that's not the case. You can have multiple mediocre patents, none of them is key, but together they give you good protection. A question that I'm not going to answer, but people always give, very bad answers. What percentage of your IP portfolio actually works, actually has value? And people say 90% of the patents are garbage and all sorts of stuff like that. I don't think it's true, but we'll talk about it a bit. Usually when you get to look at a IP portfolio, it looks a little bit like that picture over there. There's a lot, probably too much. And why is it? Should it be that way? So I gave you a few common reasons. Patents are probabilistic, meaning that if you want to be sure, you have to have more than one. The portfolio has to do with the future. The future is unknown. You have multiple assumptions. All sorts of events can happen, different risks. The company itself needs support for alternative strategies, so you can have more. The portfolio could perhaps be considered a tool chest, and I don't know about you, but my tool chest at home, I have more than one and has lots of tools in it. Some people believe that if you have more items in your portfolio, it's scarier or more impressive. People are worried that too much depends on a single patent, too many eggs in one basket. You know that some of the patents won't make it. I'll call that wear and tear. I put together in one place history. You have old patents, politics. Somebody told you have to file a patent. Hope, you'd like to believe a patent will be valuable. Myth, some people say if you don't have this, it's not good. And superstitions, garbage, especially if you filed more, you probably have a lot of patents that are garbage. And the result is there's a lot of talk, especially in times of financial problems, about paying down your portfolio. I wanted to make a quote from John Milton, and he said, "They also serve who only stand and wait." It's especially true about your IP portfolio. A lot of parts of your IP portfolio are not doing anything. They're just standing there and waiting. But if I have to summarize all of these reasons, we have different IP, and we have the different IP for different reasons. It's not all of the IP is for one reason. And this reason, I'm going to call a job to be done. Okay, so the reason why the CFO is giving money to the IP manager to build and maintain a patent portfolio is because a patent portfolio is supposed to do something. We call that a job to be done. And I made here a list, and I called them common, and they actually are common. The uncommon ones as well. Different jobs that the elements of the IP portfolio are supposed to do, with the understanding that desirably every item in your IP portfolio can be attached to at least one job to be done. Okay, you can have two jobs to be done being done by one patent, or you can have two patents working together to do one job to be done, and later we'll talk about things that are not patents helping to do it. Just very common ones. You want to attract investment. You want to interfere with the business of the competition. Maybe you want to protect your revenue stream. We talked about that 2 weeks ago. Maybe you want to block out a territory that nobody else should be doing what you're doing. There's tax reasons for having IP in your portfolio. You're about to go to war against somebody else, and some of the patents are there in order to win a battle. Lots of reasons, and maybe one day I'll actually go into each one of these reasons and talk about how you do it. A question that I'm not going to answer today is, how does an IP item do any one of these particular jobs to be done? So if we think about patents especially, a patent can be used in order to surprise, to trap, to deceive, to block, to modify the perceived risk, to generate a publication. We talked about emotional manipulation. So there's a lot of ways in which the job can be carried out by the item. So each item wants to do a job, and there are a lot of different jobs, and there's lots of different ways that it can do them, and that's perhaps what's interesting about our job as patent attorneys. I'm not going to talk about this issue of the balance between different parts of the portfolio. Yaakov Blumenthal brought it up. He said it's very important when you talk about a portfolio. So I'm making a point of not talking about it. And the reason why I'm not talking about it, when I say balance, you know, like what happens when, or how much offensive IP and how much defensive IP. The reason I'm not talking about it is not only for lack of time, but because the mix of the IP portfolio actually reflects your IP strategy and reflects, or should reflect, the strategic situation of the company. And we're not talking about that today, but it's a very important subject. And if you look at an IP portfolio and you can't connect between the balance between offensive and defensive IP and the IP strategy of the company, then you know that something's wrong. Jobs to be done. I gave you a list, but I'd like to give a slightly different and simpler taxonomy. One type is specific jobs to be done. I want to prevent a competitor A from competing in market B. I want to prevent other people from selling my disposable C. Okay, these are very specific jobs to be done. And most of the jobs to be done in a portfolio are probably going to be specific. And then there's more general jobs to be done. I want to have a patent thicket, you know, like 5 patents, which make it more difficult for somebody to copy my product. So we understand what that is, but it's more difficult to justify how any particular patent is or is not meeting this job to be done requirement. And then there's what I call positioning. Positioning are jobs that the IP portfolio is doing, but we're not tying them to any specific business goal except to general flexibility. For example, I want to have a stranglehold on a certain technology. There's no justification for it. I want to be the only one who can make chocolate frogs. It's not justified by the business, but we believe we want to do it. Another issue is timing. When does a job to be done need to be done? And often we have a single patent doing different things at different times. So we filed a patent application, and in the next 2 years, the job of the patent application is to attract investors. But starting 4 years from now, the job of the patent application is to block the competition from entering that market. And starting 10 years from now, the job of that same patent application, to be a patent by now, I hope, is to collect royalties from people that we did let into the market. And there's two types of time, which I've talked about before. One is calendar time, I just talked about years, and one is event time, investment, product launch, entry of a competitor. We can't always give an exact time, but it is a time at which that IP needs to do it. And the last issue is collaboration. Does the IP item work by itself, alone? Does it work together with other IP items, or does it work together with non-IP assets? So we have a portfolio, and we know what each item is supposed to do and why it's supposed to do. One of the things that we tend to ignore is that there are, I call them natural reasons for the IP item to be weak with respect to the job to be done. Let's say I have a patent, but for a smartwatch, for measuring, I don't know, oxidation level. But Apple have a lot of money, so they don't care that I have a patent. Okay, so a patent is naturally weak if somebody has enough money to not care about it. It doesn't mean it's not going to work, but it's going to do much less. Their weaknesses having to do with a time window. I need the patent or a freedom to operate, which is another type of IP item, or a copyright. I need it in a certain time window, but it won't be ready then. Or the other way, it will be ready, but for example, a patent needs to be asserted, means that you have to be willing to go to court. Let's just say that in the 6 months before you're trying to get a Series A investment, it's probably better not to go to court and sue somebody for patent infringement. So even though you have the patent, it can't be used. IP, especially trade secrets, can be stolen. Patents can be canceled. Happens all the time. Different countries, the IP can't be everywhere at once. If you can't prove infringement. Now, a lot of these weaknesses are known, but my point is that when you have a portfolio, you have to recognize that not only does your IP item have a job to be done, it also has natural weaknesses which will interfere with it doing that job. Maybe one last example is the issue of freedom to operate. So let's say we have a freedom to operate opinion. Well, we have freedom to operate, but there's also what my father likes to call freedom to sue. They can still sue you. And even if you don't have legal freedom to operate, you might still have freedom to act. That when you look at the entire complex of risks and costs and so on, it's okay. You can go ahead and live with it. I keep on talking about how different parts of the portfolio work together. So here's a few examples. The most common example is we have 5 patents, each one on a different feature in your product. So it adds more mass. You have a bigger patent portfolio. It's more difficult to do it. And maybe you can even have them act together like a patent thicket or minefield. Here's another trivial example. I have a patent on a first critical feature and another patent on a second critical feature. So if somebody manages to knock down one of my patents, they're still infringing the second patent, which is on a critical feature, and they can't move without it. Here's a less trivial example. I have a patent on a critical feature, and I also have trade secrets on the details required to actually implement this critical feature. So if somebody steals revokes my patent, they still don't have the trade secrets which they need in order to actually carry it out. And I'm noting that there's best mode issues and we won't talk about it. And here's another example. Let's say there's 3 ways of doing something. So I have a patent on one way of doing it. I have a trade secret on a critical feature required for way number 2, and I publish way number 3. Okay, so the act of publication, what does it do? It means that the competitors have a lot of difficulty to get protection for way number 3. And guess what? I selected it. So way number 3 is a kind which is not so good. Now the competitor will naturally be inclined to do way number 3, but they can't get exclusivity. That's good. Okay, so I have 3 parts of my portfolio working together in order to guide my competitor to do something which is not good for them and is good for us. And if I only had the patent, or only the trade secret, or only the publication, it wouldn't work as well. But the 3 of them work together. How do we get to any particular portfolio? So here's a beautiful flow chart on what we would like to do. And I don't expect anybody to follow this flow chart. But theoretically, if I know what the company strategy is, and I know enough about the situation and the context, I can identify where the company is vulnerable, so IP can maybe make it less vulnerable, and where IP can help the business plans. Now we have this pesky thing called resources, like money, inventors, prior art, and we can design an IP portfolio. Then we can figure out where the IP portfolio itself is weak. We talked about weaknesses before. And then we update the portfolio, and then we continue monitoring and updating it as we go forward. Okay, this is a dream, and we'll see why later. But the reason I'm showing you this flow chart is to connect the different acts. There's a company strategy, there's IP strategy, there's jobs to be done, there's the weakness in the particular IP items, and there's changes. So what do I have in an IP portfolio? First of all, we have registered assets, patents, trademarks, designs. Then we have unregistered assets, but if you don't manage them, they will quickly become non-assets. Trade secrets, copyright, know-how, data, and insights into the data. It's true you can register a copyright, but in general, it's unregistered. Then we have what I call knowledge assets. This is knowledge that you have and you're using it for IP purposes. The classic one is freedom to operate analysis. If you have a freedom to operate analysis, It's knowledge, it's not more than that. You can use it in court, okay? But it helps you know what to do. Same if you have alternative designs. If you have a novelty opinion, especially one against the competition, so you know that you're not infringing. Tac art. Maps showing where you have white space. Maps showing where the competitor is covered. These are different types of knowledge assets that are part of your portfolio. They cost money to create. You use them in IP work. I agree with you. And there's things that are not part of your portfolio, but I felt I had to write them. And for example, mechanisms that you need to build in your company and maintain them for generating, maintaining, and controlling the flow of IP. Just as two examples. One, how do you control external inventors? It's especially true if you're doing open development. And how do you work with other parts of the company? I think we all know about people in the company that publish inventions without going through the IP department, or perhaps one day before the patent was filed because they don't care. Or inventors that don't tell you what they invented, or marketing that don't tell you what the customers are actually looking for. Now, what does it look like when we're actually doing it? So I have two tables here. The first one is a job to be done table. Okay, in the IP department, I have a list of jobs to be done. And I have a description of the job. I have which IP items take part in this particular job. I have what things that are not IP that takes part in carrying out this job. How does these things work together? The timing, how all of this job to be done has anything to do with the business. And of course, we have assumptions and weaknesses that we have to be aware about. And lastly, how good a job am I doing? Okay, if the best I can do is 7, well, it's better than 2, but it's not as good as 10. The next table is the IP items themselves, the contents of the portfolio. And here, just for example, I have a patent on a disposable connector. It deals with a specific job to be done, number 1, which is preventing people from selling connectable disposable devices. It has a shortcoming because there could be other connector designs. And here's another item. And this item is good for this specific job to be done, but also for this general job to be done. It has its own completely different shortcomings, but it also has some positive potential. Okay, so this gives me a picture of what I have in my portfolio and how what I have in my portfolio is or is not capable of doing what I need done. So if I design an IP portfolio, what should I be looking at? And I call these coherence goals because they're not tied to any particular item. So one of them is that the IP portfolio has to be manageable by the IP manager, and it also has to have clear value. It should be easy to explain to the people in the "we give you money and tell you what to do" place why the portfolio is doing what it's doing. It should definitely cover multiple futures. We've talked in the past about the need for flexibility and adaptability. But there's 2 other items I'd like to talk about. One is budget friendly. And by budget friendly, I don't mean that it fits in your budget. I mean, it has to deal with different scenarios where they suddenly reduce your funding. Suddenly they say, okay, this year we only have a 50% IP budget. And the second item is the issue of safe fail versus fail safe. So I'm flying in an airplane and an engine blows up. And what do? put on my parachute and jump. Okay? That's nice, but it's not what we wanted. What we really want is a gradual, safe fail. If one engine goes, the airplane can continue flying with the other one or more engines. It's the same thing with your IP portfolio. If a particular patent gets revoked, if a trade secret gets lost, if somebody manages to cancel your trademark, it shouldn't fail hard. It should be soft fail. Earlier, I gave you this flow chart, and this is just a placeholder, you know, for saying, oh, planning is important, but the world is dynamic and so on. But the reality is that the IP portfolio is usually built layer upon layer, and it also grows and it evolves. And from time to time, let's say if the company has a pivot, you have a revolution. And in that sense, it's like a garden. And another very important thing about IP portfolios, we can definitely be triggered by opportunity. So we just had a case recently where the IP people were working on IP, and because they were working on IP, they realized something, and because they realized something, it created a new job to be done, which should have existed before, but nobody thought about it. And that, of course, went into the design of the portfolio. And this portfolio, which, as we said, reflects your strategy and whatever, needs regular attention. And it needs a long view. And I wanted somebody to enjoy it, but the somebody is not you, the somebody is the company. The company should be able to make use of it. And usually, but not always, we have more inventions and ideas coming in than we can actually protect. But if you're not connected to inventors or in some stages of the company life, it's not like that. So you can't plan on always having new ideas. You have to make sure to make do with what you have. To summarize, IP portfolio is not just one fish, it's a whole school of fish. Each part of the portfolio has a job. And hopefully this job relates to the vulnerabilities and opportunities of the company and how the IP can support the business goals. There's definitely a balance between different parts of the portfolio. The different parts of the portfolio work together. The entire portfolio has some logic about what's happening with it and how you have to look at it. And it shouldn't surprise you that different parts of the portfolio need different resources. Trade secrets need different resources from patents. Last but not least, you built a portfolio, you wait a bit, it's all gone. Okay, it's an ongoing job, you have to keep on swimming. Here I'm giving you a sample task. Imagine we have a client that's developing a robotic system for refurbishing existing ports. Okay, that's all over the world. And they actually have a business goal, 15% market share in 7 years. And you also have a budget, 10 patent applications. So what you would do is suggest a set of jobs to be done by your portfolio, and then propose a portfolio that actually does that. But after you do that, you have to ask yourself, what are the weaknesses and what are the risks in actually building that portfolio? So I'm stopping recording.